Women. I am one. They make up slightly more than half of the world's population. They are interesting, and Sherlock has quite a few in the supporting cast. So today, it's the first of a two-parter on the women of Sherlock. Today we're talking about Mrs Hudson, Sarah and Sally. Their importance in the story arc, their plot powers, and why they're great. The first reason that they're great is that there are different types of women on this show. I have never watched My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, but something the creator Lauren Faust said really struck me. There are lots of different ways of being a girl. You can be sweet and shy, or bold and physical. You can be silly and friendly, or reserved and studious. You can be strong and hardworking, or artistic and beautiful. And so we have Molly Hooper, who's got a silly girly pastel blog, and has a crush on Sherlock, but is a very competent mortuary technician, coroner, autopsy gremlin, whatever it is, she's good at it, and I like her. And then we have Sally Donovan, the police officer, who's serious and crotchety and competent, and I like her too. Sarah Sawyer is a doctor, John's boss, easygoing and funny and, oh yeah, competent. And I like her as well. I'm sensing a theme here. Mrs Hudson is warm and motherly and fussing and, I've never really seen her at work, as it were, so her competence, I do not know. Still, she's sharp and she's on the ball and she's funny, so I like her anyway. Competence seems to be a given, unless you're, General Shan, or Harry, I guess. Sue Lynn is good at her job and pretty clever at avoiding detection, but since both she and Shan are killed off, there's not much material there. But we'll talk about them briefly next week. Anyway, Mrs Hudson is the eldest woman on the show, so let's start with her. She is...
I'm your landlady, dear, not your housekeeper.
Something cold will do.
For this modern update, and she's sharp and funny and sweet and seems a little bit dippy, but...
A few years back, her husband got himself sentenced to death in Florida. I was able to help out.
Sorry, you stopped her husband being executed?
Oh no, I ensured it.
This is Sherlock and John's show. Everybody else is just supporting cast. But isn't it nice to know that there's more to Mrs Hudson than meets the eye? Gives her depth and interest. She doesn't really have a plot power so far, per se. Except to help John not embarrass himself on dates, and to be a shipper on deck. But she's fun, and she likes Sherlock. In a friendly, what a nice young man sort of way. That is to say, she likes him rather than fancying him. But we're talking about Molly next week, so let's move on. Sarah now. Sarah's on the receiving end of a lot of ire out of universe. Not from the characters. And I'm not entirely sure why. Sure, there are some crazy shippers who fear her breaking up their OTP, but that doesn't account for all of it. Most people who ship Sherlock and John don't really care very much about Sarah one way or another. She's John's boss, not just his girlfriend, and neither of them seem particularly unhappy about that. Sarah's plot power is the exploration of John's normalcy. She's his boss at work, she's his girlfriend. We learn career and sexuality related stuff about John, primarily through his interactions with Sarah. So why the hate? Well, some of it is just genuine dislike. I dislike River Song. I have no logical reason for doing so, but every time she's on the screen I go, eh. I could not articulate why, I just don't like her. I have a friend who feels the same way about Martha Jones, but not about River Song. She just rubs her the wrong way. So, I guess some of the dislike for Sarah is the generic dislike that some people have for any character. Sometimes characters just rub you the wrong way, but that doesn't really explain all of it. There is another side to it. An uglier side. There is Sarah hate, which extends to most of the female characters in Sherlock to some degree. That is the generic misogyny of small-minded people who are terrified that their all-boys club is being invaded by women's oh-nos. You see the same thing in the Ashes to Ashes fandom, actually. There are some people who just didn't like Alex Drake's character. They thought that Sam's character was better. But there were lots of people who just hated on her because she was a woman with feelings. She reacted to things differently than Sam did. It was a different show than Life on Mars. It had some of the same characters, yes, but all of them were in a completely different setting. There was a different focus. There were different plot arcs. You can tell the misogynists quite easily. They may have reasons for disliking the character, they may not, But instead of trying to articulate those reasons, they call the character fat and ugly and promiscuous. Except they don't use the word promiscuous. Not cool. Lol, I hate her, she's ugly is not an argument. I like Sarah, she interests me. She's brave and quick-thinking and realistic under pressure. That helpless sobbing, that's realism. When you have agency in a situation, like if you're able to move, or if you have a weapon, or if you have a plan, it's easier to be brave. When you are entirely at the mercy of very bad people with no obvious way of getting out, then helpless sobbing is about right, I would think. It's a perfectly normal reaction. She's just a normal person. She's not Superwoman. And John reacts in much the same way. Sally, now. Sally is very interesting. She and Molly are on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of personality and also in terms of their reactions to Sherlock. Molly likes Sherlock against her better judgment. Sally just can't stand him. Both are good at their respective jobs, and they're very different kinds of women, which is nice. The police canonically have never really liked Sherlock Holmes. Even Lestrade, who we're talking about in a couple of weeks' time, isn't really that keen on Sherlock. He knows that he's not really a nice person. He just knows that he needs him. Sally disliking Sherlock is perfectly reasonable for the character. There is, of course, an elephant in the room with Sally, as it were. She's having an affair with Anderson. But we haven't really seen enough of either of them to make a judgment on that. Aside from adultery is generally bad, you know? We have no idea why she hooked up with Anderson, of whom we have seen little, all of it negative, so we really can't get much from that. Sally's plot power is reminding us that people dislike Sherlock for a good reason. I wonder how that's going to play out, if there's a specific reason that she detests him so much, or if it's just a generic dislike for someone who's rude to her and her boss, and her colleagues, and everyone she knows. It adds that unexplored depth I was talking about. It's good to feel that all the characters have rich histories and complex motivations. Like, in the Star Wars universe, every one-mention, one-note character has some kind of backstory. And that's what makes the universe A, so compelling, and B, so fun to write for. There are thousands of characters. All of them have some kind of history. You could just play there forever. I like Sally, though we've seen very little of her. She's sympathetic, she's no nonsense, and she's flawed. I also like her because she and Lestrade work really well together. He listens to her, he takes her ideas on board, they have a really nice working relationship. And while I love me some UST, oh yes I do, it's lovely to see platonic male-female working relationships. Variety is the spice of life. And that is about all we have time for this week, but come back next week when we're talking about Molly Hooper and more. Bye!